Let's stick with Ukraine, though, for a moment. The intensity of Russian fire in the eastern regions of Ukraine has been increasing, with fears the defence of Mariupol looks close to its end. General Sir Richard Barrons is the former commander of Joint Forces Command from April 2013 until 2016 and joins me now. Good morning.
Good morning.
Are we entering a new and, for the Ukrainians, more dangerous phase of this conflict?
Yes, to both those questions. So we should see this as the second phase of Russia's war in Ukraine. The first phase was mostly a failure and hallmarked by them trying to do at least three things at once and it not succeeding. And in this second phase, they have made some important changes to their approach. First of all, they now have a single general who is in command of the whole war in Ukraine. He happens to have already been the general in command of the Donbass, so he was the natural choice, I think. Secondly, they are focusing on the Donbass, of which Mariupol is actually part, to do one thing at once. And that means they can focus their air power, artillery, missiles, reinforcements in terms of people and equipment and logistics and command and control on this one problem, with a view to securing some concrete territorial gain, probably defined as seizing the 2/3 of the Donbass they did not sit on the 24th of February.
And if Russia does capture the east of Ukraine, will that be a tipping point in the war, do you think?
Well, I think it would depend on how successful they are and in the way in which it occurs. Because to secure the Donbass, the Russian military have got to overcome the very well-prepared defense of the Ukrainian military, who have been in some of their positions now for 8 years. And, they are a seasoned force. It's about 2/5, I think, of the Ukrainian military. So it's quite large. And so this is going to be a very stiff fight. So one outcome from a Russian perspective is that they would break through these Ukrainian positions. There is absolutely no sign of that happening so far. And they would also try and encircle them from the north and the south, which from a military perspective would be the obvious thing to do, but they're not making much progress yet. But if they were to do those things and break through, then their eyes might be even on the Dnieper River, which bifurcates east and west Ukraine. On the other hand, if the Ukrainians keep them out and they prevent the encirclement, we may see the Russian military wearing itself out in the Donbass in the way that it wore itself out trying to get to Kyiv. I'm supposed to put some numbers on that. When the war started, the Russians had about 120 battalion tactical groups. Each are 800 to 1,000 strong and a mixture of tanks and infantry and artillery. They lost around 30 of those in the war in the first phase, particularly around Kyiv. They've had to amalgamate units and refit them. And they've probably got about 70 now in Ukraine overall. So if they were to batter another 20 to 30 unsuccessfully in the Donbass, it's hard to see how the war then does much more than dissolves into a stalemate, because the thing that's sure is that the Ukrainians do not have the military force to throw the Russians out of Ukraine. And if the Russians don't have the military force to batter their way into Ukraine, this will dissolve into a stalemate. And there's no reason to think that stalemate would be short-lived.
And so what can Ukraine and Britain, actually is one of the leading sort of military allies in this, do to counter this latest Russian onslaught? Or is this just there's a degree of inevitability about it, that Russia's massed ranks of the Russian military in the end was always going to outpower Ukraine?
There's no script or guarantee or inevitability about this, because what we're seeing on the one hand is very thoughtful, agile, determined, but numerically smaller Ukrainian military successfully fending off a much larger Russian military. And the big surprise here has been just how poor the Russian military have performed in the war to date. We saw before the 24th of February very big, very well equipped, modernized armed forces, but what we didn't see was the poor state of training, the low morale, the terrible logistic support, and they've just not managed to use their greater weight in numbers and equipment effectively. So it's hard to call how this turns out. In terms of support, there are three important things. The first is the Ukrainians need different weapons now. They need weapons that have longer range, are more lethal, and kill armor vehicles with precision. So they need to break out of having a war, where they're within a few hundred meters of their targets, to a war where they can destroy Russian attacks at ranges of several kilometers. They don't have many of those weapons. The problem for the West is the West has these weapon systems, but they're not ones the Ukrainians are used to working with or know how to maintain. So the supply issue is different in terms of scale and nature. And then two other things really matter. One is there are now 10 million people displaced in Ukraine, 5 million in Ukraine, and 5 million now mostly in the European Union. And those 10 million people need to be looked after so that essentially their youth, particularly their male youth, can focus on the fighting. And the third thing is to maintain the sanctions regime, to maintain the unity of the sanctions regime and steepen them where they can be, to squeeze Russia so that it finds the price of this war over time is just too high.
It was really good to speak to you and get that sort of insight. Thank you very much. That's General Sir Richard Barrons there, former commander of the Joint Forces Command, joining us here on Times Radio. We'll, of course, keep across everything that's happening in Ukraine throughout the show and throughout the day here on Times Radio.